Hello, and welcome to The Road Already Traveled, a podcast where we feature lessons from successful entrepreneurs and the professionals that serve them as they share their inspiring stories and insights. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, I'm Rich Schuette, your host of The Road Already Traveled, where we share lessons from entrepreneurs, like-minded business owners, and the professionals that serve them, providing valuable insight to our listeners that are on the same journey. This episode is brought to you by Avalan, a wealth management firm dedicated to personalized financial, business, and investment planning. We work with select and like-minded entrepreneurs, providing guidance tailored to their unique needs. From entrepreneurs just starting to see success to those preparing for exit, our team employs proven strategies to help them preserve and grow wealth, protect assets, maximize tax strategies, and plan for intergenerational wealth transfer as well as charitable giving. Using our unique optimal entrepreneur program and as an unwavering focus for world-class service, our relationships are built to last generations, helping clients achieve lifelong goals through a thoughtful, consultative approach. To learn how Avalan can empower you to reach your goals, please visit www.avalanwealth.com. Today, I have Chad Franzen here from Rise 25, who's done thousands of interviews with successful entrepreneurs and CEOs alike. And today, we're flipping the script, and he's going to be interviewing me. So, Chad, I'm really excited to see what I am in store for. Thanks for joining us, and hey, let's get going.
Yeah, sounds good. Rich, it's great to talk to you. It's a privilege for me to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Hey, why don't we just get started by finding out a little bit more about you? You're the founder and CEO of Avalan. Tell me how that business got started.
So that's great question. So I got into the business in the late 90s, and we'll talk a little bit more about why I did that. But when I did, I am an entrepreneur at heart, and I didn't go about doing this in the most traditional of ways. Out of college, I interviewed with all the likely suspects at the time, and mostly the big firms that have renamed or joined other firms that no longer even exist. But I realized along the way that these guys were just looking for salespeople, and really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I took a few years and decided that I was going to learn how to sell because, if you can't sell a client, you can't serve a client. But, after doing that, I wanted to come and do this the right way. So I took it upon myself to study for all my exam requirements and other things that I needed to do. And then I found somebody who I had trusted and looked up to in terms of, their path into the industry and joined it. And spent a few years working with that gentleman, and then as my career progressed, I worked and built my book, my client base with another advisor when I moved to the Santa Barbara area. And in 2011, I kind of took a pause because I was starting to see some amount of success with those I was serving, and I started to see trends, realizing that the people that I was serving were really almost exclusively entrepreneurs. And so in 2011, I decided to kind of say, how does one serve this community? And I think it's different than the way our industry has traditionally gone about it. So at that point, I sort of kind of stepped away from any other partnerships or relationships, on my business end of things, and really worked at revamping, a process that I thought was geared specifically to serving those that I most enjoyed working with. And thus we were born, and as in the iteration of me I am today, and I've been going strong ever since.
Yeah, very nice. Awesome. I'm curious how you got kind of specifically interested in the financial world. But tell me, you said you were an entrepreneur at heart. What's your first memory of having an entrepreneurial experience?
So my grandfather was my hero. Candidly, he was many people's hero. He was one of those people that, when he would walk into a room, he was the guy that everybody gravitated toward. He just had that personality, that likableness, and always had a great story or some antidote, right, in terms of life or how to make the best of it. He was quite a character. But in fourth grade, he was like my buddy. In fourth grade, he sent me a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, which I thought was really weird, and really wasn't sure what that was all about. But he called me, later that week after the first one had showed up, and he's like, "Hey, Butch," he'd always call me Butch. He's like, "Did you get that newspaper I sent your way?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "What is this?" It was very confusing. I mean, this is back in the day of stock quotes and in fractions instead of decimals, and I said, "Well, I got that so I can talk to you more often." I said, "What I want you to do is I'm going to call you up every day, and I'm going to ask you to find me some quotes and tell me, how these stocks are trading, so I can keep abreast of the stuff that I own." I'm like, "Well, okay." I don't know how to do that, and he kind of walked me through it, and that's what we did for years. He'd call me up and ask me about the various different tickers that he was interested in, and I'd read off and it's a 3 and 5/8, Grandpa, and that was kind of our conversation. So, fast forward a few years, I was probably in about seventh grade, and he took me in to meet his broker. He's like, "Yeah, you got to meet my broker. He's a great guy. You got to be like him. And then we walked into this intimidating office to a seventh grader, and out comes this guy in his shirt and tie and pair of slacks, and I watched my grandfather as this guy walked into the room, and I could tell that he really looked up to this guy, like genuinely looked up to this guy. And in that moment, I'm like, I want him to look at me like that. And I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. And fast forward all these years, and that's what I'm doing.
Nice. That is great. That's a fantastic story. So now, having fast forwarded to what you're doing now, why don't we get into a little bit about what you do and what Avalan does? I've seen that you describe yourself as kind of like a work-life connector for entrepreneurs. What does that mean?
Well, look, for those that are going to listen to this and understand that, actually acknowledge that they're entrepreneurs, we all know that we tend to get very narrow in the things that we're looking at, right? Um, at some point along the way, we started a business and we had good reasons for that, right? It's different for everybody, right? But more times than not, it's to be able to create a better life for ourselves, right? To be able to provide for those that are important to us, be it, spouse or children or parents or whatever it may be. It's like, this is why we step into it. And we also have this mindset that, we know how to do it a little bit better. And as the more we do it, the more we, are forced to believe we have to do it better or know better because a lot of people don't on our behalf. But what happens is as we see more and more success, those things that took us down this path in the first place have kind of taken us away from the original vision of what we were doing. We start to get caught up in the day-to-day stuff, the hassles, the P&Ls, the bottom line, the employee woes, all those other things that are going on in our lives, and it starts to become a grind, and we just keep pushing towards profitability, and we're leaving those things that were important on the side sort of ignored. Interesting fact, entrepreneurs are one of the highest likelihoods, have one of the highest likelihoods of divorce.
Hmm.
And so myself included, as a victim of that, mindset. And, going through that made me realize that, there's got to be something that brings us back to our core, right? To where we stop having to be everything to everyone, where we start to learn how we can, maximize what we're doing outside of our very core competencies, in terms of either outsourcing or hiring for those solutions, to be able to kind of come back into that true self, right? To where we have the ability to be present when we're done with our day, to be available to those that we care about. And, one of the biggest things that we really strive to do with the relationships that we engage with is look at the importance of why we're doing these things in the first place and making sure that our eye doesn't get taken off that ball.
I know that Avalan's philosophy kind of centers around understanding that money means different things to different people. How true is that, and how does that kind of affect your approach to working with specific types of clients?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's probably one of the most important things for any advisor to understand about their client, right? And unfortunately, when we leave those questions on the surface, we really don't get to the true meaning of what money means to somebody. Um, any interview that we start with a prospective new relationship um, begins by asking, what does money mean to you? Then we ask, well, what does it really mean to you? And then we follow it up with our third question is, okay, you told me all that, but now tell me, what does it really, really mean to you? And as you drill down and really actually take that time to start to understand, because we all start kind of it kind of means the same thing to all of us, right? It's like, oh, security, and the ability to do stuff and provide and, all that. It's all really the same. But as you dive down deeper into that personality and fact set, you'll start to see really what drives people, right? Whether it be fear or scarcity, whether it's, seeking abundance, whether it's power, control, um, philanthropic, community minded. It's like it really truly is very different. There's common themes along the way, but it really is extraordinarily different for everybody when you really, really get down to that core of who they are.
So I'm guessing once you find out the reason, why money means a certain thing to somebody, it's non-judgmental. You're just finding that out so you can approach it based going from there.
Yeah, truly. I mean, there's one investor personality that we will avoid, and that's the gambler.
Hmm.
Because you can't really manage that, right? It's that person that's looking for that high, that constant win, the willingness to lose it all. That's great in an entrepreneur when they're putting that mindset into their endeavor, into their business that they can control. But in our business, right, when we work in the planning and the investment side of things and all that, it's like there's so much that's not in our control that it's they want to be a gambler in our world. It's really better just to go to Vegas. It's a lot more fun and your odds are better.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that you specialize in meeting the needs of both current and recently exited business owners. What unique challenges maybe do those two groups face, and how do you kind of work with them?
Well, I think I touched a little bit, as we've been talking about kind of current entrepreneurs, right, and their challenges, and it's really creating that life work balance, that work life balance. But for those that have recently exited, I've got to tell you that's probably one of the most challenging types of entrepreneurs to work with, especially if you're just starting that relationship at their exit. Honestly, in an ideal world, if for anyone that's planning an exit, in the next 3 to 5 years, it's like pick who you're going to be using after your exit now. Because having an advisor that understands that journey, that path, it's so, so, so important, right? For them to get you when you hang it up. Because the minute that business is gone, and trust me, they will find something to do with their time, and eventually will think, how could have I possibly ever worked because I'm so busy? But the problem with most of us, upon exit, is that we've just lost our babies. It's like sending somebody off to a kid off to college, and all at the same time losing, any and all the influence that you've had in your life. You're back to just being a regular person. You don't get to call the shots and everything that you're doing. And so we have a tendency, and my grandfather did this as well, and this is one of the biggest challenges I think that an entrepreneur faces. We continue to basically, lead the march. And, this is what we're going to do. We got to do this. And what about that? And I want to be over here. And the problem is that, we all know a ton about the business that we're in, the business that we've operated. And we all know a lot of things, right, that encircle us along that journey. But we just don't have that expertise to be able to be calling those shots, right, in our after life, our after work life. And so, as we start as entrepreneurs barking orders at someone that we don't have a relationship with, that doesn't understand who we are, that's really more interested in the economics of the relationship than the personal well-being of the relationship, we tend to get a lot of yes men. Right? We've surrounded ourselves with yes men for the majority of our life. Most entrepreneurs have. Those that are enlightened will find people that'll stand up to them. But I'd really argue that working with a recently exited entrepreneur takes someone with a personality that can stand up to a high A personality that's used to getting their way. And my grandfather, in retrospect, now that I, have done this now for over 25 years, seeing how he was handled in that situation as a recently exited, highly successful, man. And I mentioned he was my role model. He went from, not getting out of the eighth grade due to the depression, setting in and other sorts of things like that, to by the time he was done working, he was sitting, in a seat in a boardroom in Manhattan on a publicly traded company's board. So, he was used to, getting his way and having his influence. And the guy that he'd hired, just did a lot of this, a lot of shaking his head up and down and, yes, sir, absolutely, sir. That's a great idea, sir. Even when they were really bad ideas, and they cost him a tremendous amount of his wealth, and at the end of my grandmother's days, most of her purchasing power. So that's really the challenge of working with an exited entrepreneur versus the one who's on the other end building things, because that's fun and exciting versus counseling and handholding, right?
You discussed a little bit about relationships. I know Avalan Wealth Management emphasizes building strategic relationships. Can you talk about the importance of those, particularly for entrepreneurs, and how those can be cultivated?
So, one of the things we're going to try and accomplish on this podcast, right, is not only talking to and interviewing entrepreneurs, at different paths of their journeys, so we can all learn from them, myself included, which is really the inspiration behind this, right? It's like, the lessons that I've learned from my clients have been a huge part of who I am today. But another piece of what we're going to be doing here in the podcast is we're going to be, interviewing the very professionals that work with these entrepreneurs in various different strategies of their life, be it tax professionals or, various different types of attorneys, just as an example. Because there's so much insight that, these professionals ultimately have in working with people like ourselves as entrepreneurs and ideas, and things that they can do along the way to be successful, not only in planning for eventual, those eventual non-working years, all the way through living them. So when we talk about a strategic relationship and why they're so important, the financial services industry is notorious for sitting back, in their conference room and talking about how, this is a team sport and we're the quarterback and, we're here for all that. But again, in my experience, what I've seen over the years is that what typically happens is that it's really not the case, right? It becomes more of a case of, I got a guy, I got a gal, I've got somebody. And these are people that they're basically building up, as referral sources as opposed to strategic relationships. And they're not actually walking that walk with the client through those experiences. They're not showing up, with the CPA, right, as critical tax ideas are being brought up. They're not bringing in other professionals that may ultimately be, using strategies that a CPA strategy may be unwinding because they don't know about it. So it's really not about, I got a guy, I got a gal, right? It really becomes about genuine strategic, right, and close management of the overall team, right, that's working with the entrepreneur and their advisor to be able to get to that finish line. It's not about making introductions, it's about making solutions.
You mentioned the podcast. This is your first episode of the podcast. What are you most excited about in terms of hosting it?
Yeah. Well, I was hoping that the first podcast was going to have a little bit more of an interesting guest, right?
Oh, come on.
But self-deprecation is another thing that we as entrepreneurs tend to do. But in all fairness, this has been something that I've wanted to do probably for the last 5 years or so. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, in your questions, my answers. I have always had a genuine thirst for knowledge. I'm so interested in so many things. And, I would say jack of all trades, master of none, but I do think I've mastered my trade, but I'm still a jack of many. And for me, this is about learning, right? This is about storytelling and listening to what other people have done, along the way. Not just the things that made them wildly successful, but the things that almost buried them, the things they almost couldn't get up from. And we're going to be talking about those stories and those mistakes, so those that are listening can avoid them. And we're going to talk about those success stories and those 10x home runs, grand slams, whatever they may be, so we can learn from them and potentially experience them as well too. To learn from the best experiences as well as the worst experiences. And hopefully it'll be a fun ride as we get to hear those stories as we go through the guests that I'm planning on bringing in and populating throughout this series.
Nice. Well, it sounds like it's going to be very interesting and informative, and I will be sure to check some future episodes out. It's been great to talk to you today, Rich. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, Chad, I really appreciate you taking the time. This has actually been a lot of fun, and I got to tell you, to be honest, I think I've learned a lot about how I can effectively turn the tables back as I start interviewing the guests that are going to be popping up here on the road already traveled.
Nice. Well, yeah, you're off to a great start. Thanks so much, Rich.
All right. Thank you.
So long, everybody.
As always, thanks for joining us on the Road Already Traveled podcast. We're grateful you've joined our community and look forward to seeing you again for our next installment, so be sure to click subscribe so you won't miss a thing. This communication is for informational purposes only and does not purport to be a complete statement of all material facts related to any company, industry, or security mentioned. This material is limited to the dissemination of general information pertaining to its diversified services. The opinions expressed reflect our judgment now and are subject to change without notice and may or may not be updated. The information provided, while not guaranteed as to accuracy or completeness, has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable. Financial planning, advisory, and/or consulting services offered through Avalan LLC, a registered investment advisor. Prospects or clients who take advantage of any free consultations or services are under no obligation to hire Avalan LLC as their investment advisor. Listeners who are not market professionals or institutional clients of Avalan LLC should seek the advice of their financial advisor before making any investment decisions based on this communication. Additional information on any securities mentioned is available on request.